She thought one reckless kiss would shatter her chains. Instead, it bound her to the very man she sought to defy. Lillian Hawke was supposed to be forgettable, overlooked, silent, a pawn in a world of titles and wealth. But when she fled into the shadows to sabotage her own engagement, she ignited something far more dangerous than scandal. She ignited him. This is the story of a woman cornered by duty, a duke too wild to tame, and a love that refused to follow the rules. Stay until the end to see how two souls fighting the same cage found freedom in each other. Drop a like if you believe love is the most dangerous rebellion of all, and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. The summer air at Ashwood Manor clung to skin like damp silk, thick and stifling. Lillian Hawke stood at the edge of the garden terrace, trapped in a sea of laughter and crystal and pearls that meant nothing to her. Around her, England's finest preened and gossiped, their voices a dull roar she could no longer distinguish from the hum of insects in the hedges. She held a glass of champagne she hadn't asked for and wore a smile she didn't feel. "Miss Hawke, you simply must try the lemon tarts," someone said. Lady something or other, Lillian couldn't remember. Didn't care. Cook outdid herself this year. "Lovely," Lillian murmured, the word automatic, hollow. No one noticed. They never did. She was 23 and invisible. Not because she lacked beauty, her dark hair and pale skin drew eyes when she entered a room, but because she had learned early that beauty without fortune was decoration, nothing more. Her father had been a minor baronet who drank himself into debt and an early grave. Her mother followed 2 winters later, leaving Lillian with a crumbling estate, a title that opened no doors, and a guardian uncle who saw her as a burden to be married off at the first opportunity. And now, that opportunity had arrived. "The Duke will make his intentions known by week's end," her uncle had told her 3 days ago, his tone smug, as if he'd personally arranged the stars in her favor. Rowan Ashford, newly titled, wealthy beyond measure, and in need of a wife who knows her place. Her place. The phrase tasted like ash. She had never met Rowan Ashford, didn't know his face, his voice, his character. All she knew was that he had inherited a dukedom after his elder brother's sudden death, and that society whispered about him in tones that mixed awe with unease. A man who had spent years abroad, in India and the Americas, doing heaven knew what. A man who didn't fit the mold. A man who, nonetheless, needed a respectable English bride to solidify his position. And Lillian, poor and pliable and desperate, was the perfect candidate. She set the champagne glass on a marble balustrade, untouched. Her hands were shaking. The noise pressed in, laughter like shattering glass, the scrape of violin strings, the false brightness of it all. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She needed to get away. Now. No one noticed when she slipped past the rose arbor and into the shadowed gardens beyond. The manicured paths gave way to wilder grounds. Ancient oaks and tangled ivy, the scent of night-blooming jasmine and damp earth. The moon hung low and full, painting everything in silver and smoke. Lillian walked without direction, her slippers silent on the grass. Her pulse began to slow. Out here, she could hear herself again. Out here, she wasn't a prize to be bartered or a problem to be solved. She was just... A sound stopped her cold. Water. The soft, rhythmic splash of movement in the ornamental pond ahead. She should have turned back. Should have retreated to the safety of the terrace, the suffocating predictability of polite conversation. But something, curiosity, recklessness, the sharp edge of her own desperation, pulled her forward. The pond lay in a clearing ringed by willows, their branches trailing like curtains. Moonlight shimmered on the surface, turning the water to liquid mercury. And in the center of it all, a man. He stood waist deep, his back to her, water streaming down bare skin that gleamed in the pale light. Dark hair plastered to his neck. Broad shoulders, lean muscle, the kind of body that spoke of labor or combat, not the soft indulgence of ballrooms. He moved with an ease that made her breath catch, utterly at home, utterly unashamed. Lillian froze. She should leave, she knew that. Watching a stranger bathe was beyond improper, it was unthinkable, but her feet refused to obey. She stood rooted, heart hammering, unable to look away. He turned. Water sluiced off him as he waded toward the shore, and Lillian's stomach dropped. His face came into view, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, eyes that caught the moonlight like a predator's. Not handsome in the classical sense. Too rough for that. Too real. But arresting. Impossible to ignore. And he saw her. Their eyes locked. For one endless, suspended moment, neither of them moved. Then he smiled, slow, lazy. A wolf's smile. Enjoying the view? His voice was low, roughened by years away from England's polished parlors. American, maybe. Or something shaped by distance and dust and places that didn't care about titles. Heat flooded Lillian's face. I didn't mean to spy. He stepped closer, water dripping from his skin, absolutely unbothered by his state of undress. Or didn't expect to get caught. I wasn't spying. The words came out sharper than she intended, defensive. I was walking. I didn't know anyone was here. And yet here you are. He tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Still watching. She should run, should spin on her heel and flee back to the lights and the music and the suffocating safety of people who would never dare speak to her like this. But something in his gaze held her fast. A challenge, a question, a spark she couldn't name. Who are you? She demanded, trying to reclaim some shred of dignity. Does it matter? It does if you're trespassing on Lord Ashwood's estate. That smile widened. Am I? You're not a guest. I would have seen you. Maybe you weren't looking. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. You're insufferable. And you're still here. The accusation landed like a physical blow, because he was right. She was still here, rooted to the spot, unable to tear herself away from this stranger who spoke to her like an equal, who looked at her like she mattered, like she was more than a convenient arrangement or a decorative afterthought. I'm leaving, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Are you? He took another step forward, close enough now that she could see the water droplets clinging to his collarbone, the faint scar that ran along his ribs. Or are you going to keep standing there, pretending you're scandalized, when really you're just curious? I am not. You ran away from that party. His tone shifted, losing the teasing edge. Something softer crept in. Knowing. I saw you. Watched you slip into the dark like you were drowning, and this was the only air you could find. Lillian's breath hitched. How did he? I know what that looks like, he continued, quieter now. When the cage gets too small and you'd rather risk the wolves than go back inside. The truth of it cut too deep. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. Go back to your party, little bird. He turned away, dismissing her, and somehow that was worse than the intensity of his stare. Before someone notices you're gone and decides you're ruined. I'm not. She stopped. Swallowed. I don't need your advice. No? He glanced over his shoulder, something unreadable in his expression. Then what do you need? The question hung in the air between them, too honest, too raw. Lillian felt something crack open inside her chest, all the fear and fury and hopelessness she'd been choking down for weeks, months, years. I need to not be a commodity, she heard herself say. I need to not have my entire future decided by men who see me as a problem to solve or a title to acquire. I need, her voice broke. I need to matter, just once. Silence. Then he nodded, slow and deliberate. Fair enough? He moved toward the shore where his clothes lay in a careless pile. Lillian's face burned, but she couldn't make herself turn away. Not yet. You should go, he said again, pulling on a shirt with movements that suggested he genuinely didn't care whether she stayed or left. Before you regret this more than you already do. I don't. She stopped, because she did regret it. Already. Not because of propriety or scandal, but because he'd seen too much, heard too much. She felt stripped bare in a way that had nothing to do with who was or wasn't wearing clothes. Lillian! The voice came from somewhere beyond the willows. Her uncle, or one of the matrons tasked with chaperoning the unmarried girls. Panic spiked through her. The stranger's eyes flicked toward the sound, then back to her. Run! She didn't need to be told twice. Lillian gathered her skirts and fled, branches catching at her hair, her heart pounding so loud she couldn't hear her own footsteps. She burst back onto the terrace, breathless and flushed, just as her uncle rounded the corner. There you are. He frowned at her dishevelment. Where have you been? I needed air, she managed, forcing her voice steady. The heat. Well, compose yourself. The evening isn't over. His gaze swept over her, critical. You look a mess. She bit back the retort rising in her throat, nodded, smoothed her skirts, and tried not to think about moonlight on water or the way a stranger had looked at her like she was a person, not a prize. The announcement came 2 days later. Lillian sat in the drawing room of her uncle's London townhouse, hands folded in her lap, while he paced before the fireplace like a general planning a campaign. The Duke of Ashford has requested a formal introduction, he said, barely containing his satisfaction. Tomorrow. Here. Do not embarrass me, Lillian. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. Her stomach turned to stone. I haven't agreed to anything. You don't need to agree. I'm your guardian. The decision is made. I'm of age. You can't force me. Can't I? He stopped pacing, fixing her with a look of cold contempt. You have no money, no prospects. No one else is going to marry you, girl. Ashford is your only chance at a decent life, and you'll accept him with gratitude or find yourself in a much less comfortable situation. The threat was clear. Marry the Duke or be cast out entirely. Lillian's nails dug into her palms. I don't even know him. You'll learn. That's what wives do. He turned away, dismissing her. Wear the blue dress, and for heaven's sake, smile. She fled to her room before he could see the tears. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind churning. She pictured a life shackled to a man she didn't know, bearing his children, managing his household, slowly disappearing into the role of duchess until there was nothing left of her at all. And she thought of the stranger by the pond, the way he'd spoken to her, the way he'd seen her. I need to matter. Just once. The words echoed in her skull, relentless. By dawn, a plan had formed. Desperate, reckless, possibly insane, but it was hers. The Ashford Masquerade Ball was the event of the season. Held at the Duke's sprawling London residence, it drew everyone who mattered, and many who didn't, all desperate for a glimpse of the new Duke and his rumored bride-to-be. Lillian arrived in a silver gown and a mask of white feathers that covered half her face. Her uncle had insisted she attend, a public display of their impending alliance. He didn't know she had other plans. The ballroom glittered with candlelight and champagne, a swirl of silk and laughter and secrets hidden behind painted masks. Lillian moved through the crowd like a ghost, unnoticed, unremarkable. Perfect. She'd spent the past week asking questions, gathering information. She knew the Duke's reputation now, wild, unpredictable, a man who'd lived half his life in places polite society didn't talk about, a man who didn't follow the rules. And she knew that if she could ruin herself publicly, spectacularly, the engagement would shatter. No Duke, no matter how desperate for respectability, would marry a woman who'd been caught in a compromising position with another man. All she needed was a willing accomplice. And in a ballroom full of masked strangers, anonymity was a gift. She spotted him near the garden doors, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black with a simple half-mask that did nothing to hide the sharp line of his jaw. He stood apart from the crowd, watching with the detached interest of someone who didn't quite belong. Perfect. Lillian's heart hammered as she approached. She'd rehearsed this. She could do this. Dance with me. He turned, and even through the mask, she saw the flicker of surprise. Excuse me? One dance. That's all I'm asking. She kept her voice low, urgent. Please. He studied her for a long moment. Then, inexplicably, he offered his hand. One dance? She took it. They moved onto the floor as a waltz began, his hand settling at her waist with a certainty that sent heat racing through her. He moved well, too well for someone who'd been standing alone moments before. You're nervous, he observed. I'm not. You're trembling. She was. Damn it. It's warm in here. Is it? His tone suggested he didn't believe her for a second. What's your name? Does it matter? A pause, then quietly, Little Bird. Lillian's blood turned to ice. No, no. She looked up, really looked, and through the mask she saw eyes she recognized, Eyes that had watched her by a moonlit pond. Eyes that had seen too much. The stranger from the garden. Rowan Ashford, her future husband. The man she'd come here to betray. You, she breathed. His smile was sharp as a blade. Me. Panic surged. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Not painful, but unyielding. Don't run, he said softly. Not yet. We're being watched. He was right. She could feel eyes on them, the weight of scrutiny from 100 masked faces. Let me go, she hissed. Is that really what you want? He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. Or did you come here tonight with a different plan entirely? Her heart stopped. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew exactly what she'd intended. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? The music swelled and he spun her effortlessly through the crowd. You wanted to ruin yourself. Needed someone to compromise you so thoroughly that even I wouldn't want you anymore. His voice dropped, dangerous and amused. Am I close? She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Here's the problem, Lillian. He said her name like a secret. You picked the wrong man. I didn't pick you at all, she shot back, finding her voice. I didn't know. Didn't you? He pulled her closer until there was barely space between them. Or maybe part of you did. Maybe that's what scared you. You're insane. Probably. He didn't sound bothered. But you're still dancing with me. The waltz ended. Applause rippled through the ballroom. Rowan didn't let go. Come with me, he said. It wasn't a question. Absolutely not. Then I'll tell everyone here exactly what you plan to do tonight. How the poor, desperate Miss Hawke tried to sabotage her own engagement because she'd rather be ruined than married. The threat landed like a punch. You wouldn't. Try me. Fury and fear warred in her chest, but beneath it, something else stirred. Something that recognized the challenge in his eyes, the same wildness she'd felt by the pond. She'd wanted rebellion, wanted to seize control of her own fate. Here it was, just not the way she'd imagined. Fine, she bit out, but if you think this changes anything, it changes everything. He released her, stepping back with a slight bow. Follow me in 2 minutes, the east corridor, third door on the left. Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd before she could respond. Lillian stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom, her pulse roaring in her ears. She could leave. Should leave. This was madness. But she'd come here tonight to take back her life, to prove she was more than a pawn in someone else's game. And maybe, just maybe, the man she'd thought was her enemy understood that better than anyone. She counted to 60, then 60 again. Then she followed. The east corridor was shadowed and empty, lit only by scattered candles. Lillian's footsteps echoed on marble as she found the third door. It stood slightly ajar. She pushed it open. The room beyond was a library, floor-to-ceiling shelves, leather chairs, the scent of old paper and tobacco. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, and Rowan Ashford stood by the fireplace, mask removed, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. You came. You blackmailed me. I gave you a choice. He moved toward her, slow and deliberate. You could have walked away, but you didn't. Because you threatened to humiliate me. Because you wanted to see what would happen. He stopped an arm's length away. Admit it. Her breath came quick and shallow. You don't know anything about me. I know you're suffocating. I know you'd rather burn your life down than live it on someone else's terms. I know you came to that ball tonight ready to destroy yourself just to escape me. His gaze held hers, unflinching. And I know you deserve better than that. The words hit like a blow to the chest. Then let me go. No. Why not? Because I'm suffocating too. The admission came quiet, raw, because I've spent the last 2 weeks being paraded in front of society like a prize stallion, told who I should marry and how I should behave and what I should become. And I'm sick of it. He took a breath. You're not the only one trapped in this, Lillian. She stared at him, something shifting in her understanding. Then why agree to marry you? He shrugged. Because my solicitors insisted I needed a wife to secure the title. Because your uncle made it clear you had no other options. Because I thought maybe we could both survive this if we stopped fighting each other and started fighting them. Them? Everyone who thinks they get to decide what we do with our lives. Silence fell between them, charged and fragile. Lillian's mind raced. This wasn't what she'd expected. None of it was. You could have told me, she said finally, at the pond. You knew who I was. Would you have listened? He tilted his head. Or would you have run faster? Fair point. She looked at him, really looked, saw the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion around his eyes, the man behind the title. What do you want from me? She asked. Honestly? He exhaled, something like relief crossing his face. I want you to stop looking at me like I'm your executioner. I want a chance to prove we don't have to be enemies, and… He hesitated. I want to know if what I felt by that pond was real, or just desperation. Heat flooded her. What you felt? You know what I mean. She did. She'd felt it too, that pull, that recognition. The sense of meeting someone who understood the cage because they lived in one too. This is insane, she whispered. Probably. I can't just… Then don't. He stepped back, giving her space. Go home. Refuse the engagement. Tell your uncle to find someone else. I won't stop you. You said, I lied. A faint smile. I'm not going to blackmail you, Lillian. I'm not going to force you into anything. If you want out, you're out. She stared at him, stunned. But if you stay, he continued, quieter now, if you give this a chance, give us a chance. I promise you won't be a pawn. You'll be a partner, an equal. He met her eyes. That's all I can offer. That, and the fact that I have no idea what I'm doing either. Lillian's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to protect herself, to trust nothing and no one. But somewhere beneath the fear, a small, stubborn voice whispered, what if? What if he meant it? What if this didn't have to be a prison? What if… She closed the distance between them in 3 quick steps and kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't thought through. It was impulse and fury and recklessness and need all tangled together. Her hands fisted in his shirt. His arms came around her, pulling her closer, and for one breathless moment the world narrowed to heat and pressure and the taste of champagne and risk. Then reality crashed back. Lillian jerked away, breathing hard. Don't apologize. His voice was rough, shaken. Please don't apologize. I wasn't going to. She pressed a hand to her lips, trying to steady herself. I was going to say I don't know what I'm doing. Neither do I. A pause, then softer. But I'd like to find out. She looked at him. This stranger, this duke, this man who'd somehow become the most honest person in her world, and made a choice. One condition. Name it. If this doesn't work, if I can't… She swallowed. If I can't do this, you let me go. No scandal, no punishment, you let me walk away. He considered, then nodded. Deal. Just like that? Just like that. He offered his hand. Partners? Lillian stared at the outstretched hand, at the man offering it, at the risk, at the possibility. She took it. Partners. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the windows, the future shifted, uncertain, terrifying, and entirely their own. The carriage ride back to her uncle's townhouse felt like being buried alive. Lillian sat rigid against the velvet cushions, her mask clutched in one hand, trying to make sense of what she'd just done. The kiss still burned on her lips, reckless, stupid, dangerous. A promise she didn't know if she could keep. Her uncle sat across from her, oblivious, droning on about the brilliance of the evening, the envious glances from the other families, the assured future that awaited her. She heard maybe 1 word in 10. And the Duke seemed quite taken with you. Did you dance? Yes? Good. Good. He nodded, satisfied. The formal betrothal will be announced next week. We'll host a dinner. Small, tasteful, just the right families. Lillian's stomach twisted. Uncle, I need to… You need to rest. You look pale. He waved a dismissive hand. Wedding preparations are exhausting, I'm sure, but worth it. You'll thank me someday, girl. She bit her tongue hard enough to taste copper. When they arrived, she fled to her room without another word, slamming the door behind her. She stood in the darkness, breathing hard, her mind racing in circles. What had she agreed to? Partnership? Equality? With a man she'd met twice, once while he was naked in a pond, once while she was trying to sabotage her own life? It was madness. But the alternative was worse, a lifetime of suffocation, of being owned, managed, erased. At least this way she'd chosen. Even if the choice terrified her, she didn't sleep. By dawn, exhaustion sat heavy in her bones, but her resolve had hardened. If she was going to survive this, she needed to stop reacting and start planning. She needed to understand who Rowan Ashford really was. Not the rumors, not the reputation, the truth. And she needed to do it before the rest of London's vultures descended. The first blow came 3 days later. Lillian had taken to walking in Hyde Park early in the mornings before the fashionable crowds arrived. It was the only time she felt like she could breathe. That morning, mist clung to the pathways, and the air smelled of wet grass and horses. She was rounding the Serpentine when she heard her name. "Miss Hawke, a word if you please." She turned. Lady Pemberton approached with 2 other women in tow, matrons all, pillars of society. The kind who decided reputations over tea and destroyed lives with a well-placed whisper. Lillian's spine stiffened. "Lady Pemberton, we heard the most extraordinary news." The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "About your engagement to the Duke of Ashford. The announcement hasn't been made." "No, but these things do get around." Lady Pemberton's gaze swept over Lillian with surgical precision. "Tell me, dear, how did you manage it? A girl with no fortune, no connections, no prospects beyond what your uncle could scrape together, and suddenly you're to be a duchess." The words were poison wrapped in silk. The other women watched, waiting. Lillian forced herself to smile. "I suppose the Duke saw something he liked." "I'm sure he did." A knowing look passed between the matrons. "Though one does wonder what exactly. You're pretty enough, I suppose, but hardly exceptional. And your family? Well, let's just say the late baronet's debts are still being discussed in certain circles." Heat crawled up Lillian's neck. "My father's affairs are none of your concern." "Aren't they? When you're about to marry into one of England's greatest titles?" Lady Pemberton stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "We simply want to ensure you understand the responsibility, the scrutiny. A duchess must be above reproach. Any hint of scandal, any whisper of impropriety, and it reflects on us all. I'm aware of the expectations." "Are you?" The woman's eyes glittered. "Because there are already questions, dear, about how quickly this came about, about whether the Duke truly chose you, or whether you were simply convenient." One of the other matrons tittered. "Or perhaps insistent." Lillian's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She wanted to scream, to shove these women into the Serpentine and watch their feathered hats float away. But she swallowed it down, forced her face into a mask of calm. "If there's nothing else, just a friendly warning." Lady Pemberton's smile sharpened. "We'll be watching, Miss Hawke, all of us. And if you prove unworthy of the title you're about to claim, we'll make certain everyone knows it." They swept away in a rustle of skirts and malice, leaving Lillian trembling with rage. She stood there long after they'd gone, staring at the water, fighting the urge to run. This was what her life would be. Constant judgment, constant testing, every mistake magnified, every misstep weaponized. She'd known it would be hard. She just hadn't expected the attack to come so soon, or so personally. Sad. Rowan's townhouse stood in Mayfair, elegant and imposing behind wrought iron gates. Lillian had never been inside, had never been invited. But that morning, still shaking from the encounter in the park, she made a decision. If they were going to be partners, she needed answers, and she needed them now. The butler who answered her knock looked alarmed. "Miss Hawke, I need to see the Duke. His Grace is not receiving—" "I don't care." She pushed past him into the entrance hall, ignoring the scandalized gasp. "Tell him I'm here, now." Footsteps on the stairs. Rowan appeared on the landing, half-dressed in shirt sleeves and waistcoat, his hair disheveled. He took one look at her face and descended quickly. "Lillian, we need to talk." He glanced at the butler, who stood frozen in shock. "That will be all, Henderson." "But, sir, now." The butler fled. Rowan turned to her, concern etched in the lines around his eyes. "What happened?" "Your world happened." She was shaking, couldn't stop. "I was ambushed in Hyde Park by a pack of matrons who made it very clear that I'm not good enough for you, that I'm being watched, that any mistake I make will be used to destroy us both." His jaw tightened. "Who?" "Does it matter? Lady Pemberton? Lady someone else? They're all the same." She paced the hall, unable to stand still. "They think I trapped you. They think I'm a fortune hunter, or a social climber, or I don't even know. All I know is they're waiting for me to fail." "Then don't give them the satisfaction." "Easy for you to say." The words burst out of her, raw and furious. "You're a duke. You can do whatever you want. But me? I'm nothing. I'm no one. And every single person in this city is going to make sure I remember it." Rowan crossed to her in 3 strides, gripping her shoulders. Not rough, but firm enough to stop her spiraling. "Look at me." She did. His eyes were dark, intense, utterly focused. "You're not nothing, and you're not alone." His voice was low, steady. "I told you we're partners. That means when they come for you, they come for me too. And I don't break easily." "You don't understand. I spent 5 years in India and the American frontier, Lillian. I've been shot at, swindled, and left for dead more times than I can count. London society is just another kind of wilderness. Meaner, maybe. More vicious. But the same rules apply." He released her, stepped back. "You survive by not showing weakness, by making them think twice before they strike, and by hitting back harder when they do." She stared at him. "How?" A slow smile spread across his face. "Dangerous. Predatory. We stop playing their game. We make our own." Checked. The plan was simple, audacious, possibly insane. They would host their own event, a garden party at Ashford House, the Duke's sprawling country estate just outside London. But unlike the usual stilted affairs, this would be a statement, a challenge, an announcement that Lillian Hawke was not going to cower or apologize or fade into the background. "It's a risk," Rowan said as they sat in his study, maps and guest lists spread between them. "If it goes wrong, the backlash will be brutal. And if it goes right, then we shift the narrative, make them see you the way I see you." "Which is?" He looked up from the papers, something unreadable in his expression. "Brave, stubborn, unbreakable." Heat flooded her face. She looked away. "I'm none of those things." "You stormed into my house this morning and demanded answers. You planned to sabotage your own engagement rather than submit. You kissed me in a library even though you thought I was your enemy." He leaned back in his chair. "You're all of those things. You just don't see it yet." She didn't know what to say to that. The preparations consumed the next week. Invitations went out, not just to the elite, but to artists, writers, reformers, people who existed at the edges of society's approval. The menu featured dishes from India and the Americas, spices and flavors that would shock the traditional palates. Musicians were hired, not a string quartet, but a folk band that played reels and jigs. "You're going to scandalize them," Lillian said, staring at the plans. "That's the idea." Rowan grinned. "If they're going to talk about you anyway, let's give them something worth talking about." But as the date approached, doubt crept in. Lillian lay awake at night, imagining all the ways it could fail. The whispers, the sneers, the vindication on Lady Pemberton's face when Lillian proved herself exactly as unworthy as they'd predicted. She almost called it off. Then, 2 days before the party, a letter arrived. It was addressed to her in careful, elegant script. No return address. She opened it alone in her room, her hands trembling. "Miss Hawke, you do not know me, but I know of you. I was engaged to the Duke's late brother before his death. I write to warn you, the Ashford title carries shadows. Expectations. Cruelties that will not be kind to someone of your position. If you value your peace, walk away now. The Duke may promise you partnership, but the family will demand submission, and they do not forgive weakness. A friend." Lillian read it 3 times, ice spreading through her veins. She should show Rowan, should ask him about his brother, the family, the shadows hinted at in cryptic lines. Instead, she folded the letter carefully and hid it in the bottom of her dresser drawer. Because she'd already made her choice, and if there were monsters waiting, she'd face them when they came. The morning of the garden party dawned bright and merciless. Lillian dressed in pale green silk, simple and elegant, her hair pinned up with minimal fuss. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back, calm, composed, utterly terrified. Ashford House was beautiful in the daylight, its gardens sprawling across acres of manicured lawns and wild groves. Tables had been set up beneath ancient oaks, decorated with flowers that spilled over in riotous color. The musicians tuned their instruments. Servants moved with quiet efficiency. Rowan found her standing at the edge of the terrace, staring out at the preparations. "Second thoughts?" he asked. "10th or 11th, maybe?" He stepped beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "You can still back out. We'll cancel. Blame it on me." "No." She took a breath. "No, I'm done running." "Good." He paused. "Because they're going to try to break you today. The questions. The judgments. It's going to be worse than Hyde Park." "I know. And if it gets to be too much, I'll survive." She turned to face him. "You said we're partners. Prove it. Stand with me and I'll stand with you." Something shifted in his expression. Respect maybe, or recognition. "Deal." The guests began to arrive around noon. Lillian stood at Rowan's side, greeting each one with a smile that felt like armor. Some were polite. Some were curious. Some radiated disapproval so thick it was almost tangible. Lady Pemberton arrived with her entourage, her gaze sweeping over the unconventional decorations with barely concealed disdain. "How rustic." "I thought it suited the occasion," Rowan replied smoothly. "Tradition has its place, but so does honesty." "Indeed." The woman's eyes settled on Lillian. "And how are you managing the preparations, Miss Hawke? I imagine this is all rather overwhelming for someone of your background." The insult was clear. Lillian felt Rowan tense beside her, but before he could respond, she stepped forward. "Actually, Lady Pemberton, I find it refreshing. Where I come from, we valued substance over spectacle. I'm sure that's a foreign concept in some circles, but I'm finding it quite freeing." A flicker of surprise crossed the matron's face, then calculation. "How charming. I do hope you're prepared for the responsibilities that come with the title. They are substantial." "I'm sure they are, but I've never been afraid of work or expectations." Lillian met her gaze evenly. "Have you?" A beat of silence. Then Lady Pemberton's smile froze into something brittle. "Enjoy your party, Miss Hawke. I'm sure it will be memorable." She swept away. Lillian's heart hammered, but she kept her face neutral. Rowan leaned close. "You just made an enemy." "I think I already had one." "Fair point." The afternoon unfolded in a series of small skirmishes. Questions disguised as compliments. Compliments laced with barbs. Lillian parried each one, her smile never faltering, even as exhaustion clawed at her edges. Then the music shifted. The folk band struck up a lively reel, and suddenly the carefully controlled atmosphere cracked. Some of the younger guests began to dance, not the formal waltzes of London ballrooms, but something wilder, freer. Rowan caught Lillian's hand. "Dance with me." "I don't know this kind of—" "Neither do I. We'll figure it out." He pulled her into the fray before she could protest. The music was fast, chaotic, nothing like the structured steps she'd been taught. She stumbled, laughed, let him spin her in circles until she was dizzy and breathless. And for the first time all day, she forgot to be afraid. Around them, the crowd watched, some with disapproval, some with envy, but Lillian didn't care. In that moment, with Rowan's hand in hers and the sun warm on her face, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Free. The song ended. She was breathless, flushed, grinning despite herself. "See?" Rowan said, his own smile genuine. "Not so terrible." It was... A voice cut through the moment like a knife. How delightful to see the happy couple so uninhibited. Lillian turned. A woman stood at the edge of the dance floor, tall, elegant, ice-blonde hair swept up in perfect curls. Her gown was deep burgundy, expensive, immaculate, and her eyes, when they settled on Lillian, were cold as winter. Lady Catherine, Rowan said, his voice carefully neutral. I didn't know you'd be attending. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The woman's smile was sharp. After all, I was so fond of your brother. I felt I owed it to his memory to observe. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. This was her, the woman from the letter, the Duke's brother's fiancée. Lady Catherine Marlowe, Rowan said stiffly. May I present Miss Lillian Hawke? Catherine's gaze raked over Lillian with surgical precision. Charming, truly. I can see why you chose her, Rowan. So different from what the family expected. The insult was barely veiled. Lillian's hands clenched. I'm sure my brother would have approved, Rowan said. Are you? Catherine tilted her head. James always had such exacting standards. He believed the duchy deserved someone who understood its legacy, its importance. A pause. Someone who could carry the weight without crumbling. I'm stronger than I look, Lillian said quietly. I'm sure you think so. Catherine's smile widened. But thinking and being are very different things, aren't they? I do hope you're prepared, Miss Hawke. This family has a way of testing those who enter it, and not everyone survives. The threat was clear. Rowan stepped between them, his voice hard. That's enough, Catherine. Is it? I'm simply offering friendly advice. As someone who nearly joined this family myself. Her eyes flicked to Lillian. Do be careful, dear. The shadows here run deeper than you know. Then she turned and glided away, leaving a wake of ice and menace. Lillian stood frozen, her earlier confidence shattered. Around them, guests whispered, their eyes bright with the promise of scandal. Rowan took her arm, his grip gentle but firm. Ignore her. She knows something about your brother, about the family. Catherine thrives on power and fear. Don't give her either. But the damage was done. The rest of the party passed in a blur. Lillian smiled, nodded, made polite conversation, but inside she was screaming. When the last guest finally departed, she stood alone in the emptying garden, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Rowan found her there. You did well today, he said. Did I? She laughed, bitter. I made enemies, gave them ammunition, proved every doubt they had. You proved you're not going to bow. He stepped beside her. That's more important. Is it? She turned to face him. Your brother's fiancée just threatened me in front of half of London. What was that about? What aren't you telling me? His jaw tightened. James died suddenly, riding accident. But Catherine never accepted it. She's been difficult, bitter. That's not an answer. It's all I have right now. Frustration burned in her chest. We're supposed to be partners. That means honesty, Rowan. Or did you lie about that too? I didn't lie. His voice was rough. But there are things about my family, about this title, that I'm still trying to understand myself. I promise you, when I have answers, you'll be the first to know. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that they were on the same side, but the letter in her drawer whispered otherwise, and Catherine's cold smile lingered in her mind like poison. I need to go, she said quietly. Lillian, I just need space to think. He didn't try to stop her. She walked back through the gardens alone, the beauty of the afternoon now tainted by shadows she couldn't name. When she climbed into the carriage that would take her back to London, she looked out the window one last time. Rowan stood on the terrace, watching her leave, his expression unreadable. And for the first time since she'd agreed to this partnership, Lillian wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. That night, alone in her room, she retrieved the letter from its hiding place and read it again. The words seemed darker now, more urgent. The family will demand submission, and they do not forgive weakness. A knock at her door made her jump. She shoved the letter back into the drawer. Miss Hawke? Her maid's voice tentative. There's a person here to see you, says it's urgent. At this hour? They wouldn't give a name, but they said you'd want to hear what they have to say. Miss, unease prickled down Lillian's spine. Send them away. They said it's about the Duke, about his brother. Her heart stopped. Against every instinct screaming at her to stay in her room, to hide, to ignore this, Lillian rose and descended the stairs. A figure waited in the shadows of the entrance hall, hooded and anonymous. Miss Hawke. The voice was female, low and rough. You don't know me, but I worked at Ashford House when the old Duke was alive, and I know what happened to his son. Lillian's mouth went dry. What are you talking about? James Ashford didn't die in a riding accident. The woman stepped closer, and in the dim light, Lillian saw her face, lined, weary, haunted. He was murdered, and if you marry Rowan Ashford, you'll be next. The world tilted. Before Lillian could respond, could demand proof or explanation or anything, the woman pressed something into her hand and vanished into the night. Lillian stood alone in the hall, her pulse roaring in her ears. She looked down at what she'd been given. A locket, tarnished silver, engraved with initials she didn't recognize. And inside, a portrait of a man who looked exactly like Rowan, but wasn't, his brother, James Ashford, and scrawled on the back of the portrait, in desperate, hurried script, "Trust no one." Lillian's hands shook as she stared at the portrait. James Ashford's painted eyes seemed to follow her, accusing, desperate. The scratched warning on the back blurred as her vision swam. Trust no one. She stood alone in the dim hallway, the woman's words echoing in her skull. Murdered. You'll be next. This was insane. Had to be. Some vengeful servant spinning lies or Catherine Marlowe's doing, another weapon in whatever game the woman was playing. But the locket felt heavy in her palm, real and damning, and the fear crawling up her spine wouldn't be reasoned away. She needed answers, and there was only one person who might have them. Lillian climbed the stairs to her room, her mind racing. She wrapped the locket in a handkerchief and shoved it into her reticule alongside the anonymous letter. Then she pulled out fresh paper and wrote quickly, her penmanship jagged with urgency. I need to see you. Tonight. The matter cannot wait. L. She sealed it, rang for her maid, and sent the note to Rowan's townhouse with strict instructions for immediate delivery. Then she paced, and waited, and tried not to think about how many ways this could go wrong. An hour later, a reply came. Midnight. The garden gate at Grosvenor Square. Come alone. R. Lillian slipped out of her uncle's house well after 11, cloaked and hooded, moving through London's shadowed streets like a ghost. The city at night was a different creature, dangerous, unpredictable. Carriages rattled past, their occupants hidden. Voices drifted from taverns. Somewhere a woman laughed, high and brittle. She kept her head down and walked fast. Grosvenor Square was quiet when she arrived, the grand houses dark and shuttered. The garden gate stood slightly ajar. She slipped through, her heart hammering. Rowan materialized from the shadows so suddenly she gasped. Easy. He caught her elbow. It's me. You scared me half to death. You asked for midnight in a public garden. I'm being cautious. His eyes searched her face. What happened? She pulled the locket from her reticule and thrust it at him. Tell me this is a lie. He took it, opened it, and went still. In the moonlight, she saw the color drain from his face. Where did you get this? A woman came to my house tonight. Said she worked at Ashford House. Said your brother didn't die in an accident. Said he was murdered. Her voice cracked. Is it true? Rowan's jaw clenched. He snapped the locket shut and looked away, his shoulders rigid. Rowan, is it true? I don't know. The words came out rough, strained. I've had suspicions. Things that didn't add up, but no proof. Nothing concrete. What kind of things? He exhaled hard, running a hand through his hair. James wrote to me 3 weeks before he died. I was in Boston. The letter was vague, coded almost. He said he'd uncovered something about the estate finances, something that would shake the family to its foundations. He wanted me to come home, wanted my help. And? By the time I arrived, he was dead, thrown from his horse during a morning ride, neck broken. The physicians ruled it accidental. He looked at her, and she saw the torment in his eyes. But James was the best rider I've ever known. He grew up on those trails. He wouldn't have been thrown unless something spooked his horse, or someone made sure he fell. Cold dread pooled in Lillian's stomach. You think someone killed him? I think it's possible. He opened the locket again, staring at his brother's face. But I have no idea who, or why. The estate accounts are a mess. My father was careless, James tried to fix it, and now I'm drowning in ledgers that make no sense. If there was embezzlement or fraud, I can't find it. Who had access? Everyone? The solicitors, the steward. Catherine's family invested heavily in some of my father's ventures. He laughed bitterly. Half of London's aristocracy has their fingers in Ashford money somehow. Tracing it all is like trying to catch smoke. Lillian's mind raced. The woman who brought me this, she said if I married you, I'd be next. Why? What threat would I pose? None. Unless, he frowned, unless whoever killed James thinks you might help me uncover the truth, that together we'd be stronger, more dangerous. Or maybe they just want to isolate you, keep you vulnerable. His eyes snapped to hers. What do you mean? You said it yourself. You've been back in England, 2 months? You're still figuring out the title, the estate, the finances. You're surrounded by people who knew your father and brother far better than they know you. She stepped closer. What if that's intentional? What if someone wants you off balance, distracted, easy to control or eliminate? Then marrying you makes me harder to kill, or puts a target on both our backs. Silence fell between them. Around them, the garden rustled with wind and unseen movement. Lillian pulled her cloak tighter. We should call off the engagement, she said quietly. No. Rowan, if we break it now, they win, whoever they are. His voice was steel, and I'm done letting people manipulate my life. James deserves justice. I'm going to find out what happened to him, with or without you. That's not fair. None of this is fair. He moved closer, his intensity almost overwhelming. But I meant what I said. Partners. I won't ask you to risk yourself for me. If you want out, I'll arrange it. No scandal, no consequences. You walk away clean. She should take it. Should run as far and fast as she could from this nightmare of murder and conspiracy and danger she didn't understand. But the thought of Rowan facing it alone, of never knowing the truth, of letting whoever killed James win, made her sick. I need to think, she managed. Fair enough. He pressed the locket back into her hand. Keep this. Hide it. And Lillian, don't trust anyone, not the servants, not your uncle, not even Catherine. Until we know who we're fighting, everyone's suspect. She nodded, throat tight. Go home. Lock your door. I'll send word tomorrow. She turned to leave, then stopped. Rowan? What if we're wrong? What if James really did just fall? He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much, survived too much. Then we're paranoid and careful. But if we're right, and we do nothing, we're dead. Lillian didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed watching shadows move across the ceiling, the locket hidden beneath her pillow, her mind spinning through possibilities and nightmares. By morning, she'd made a decision. If someone was targeting the Ashford family, targeting Rowan, then the upcoming betrothal dinner was the perfect opportunity to strike. All the key players would be there, the solicitors, the family friends, Catherine and her circle. If Lillian was going to help Rowan find answers, she needed to start paying attention. Watching. Listening for the lies beneath the polite conversation. She would go to that dinner, and she would play the role everyone expected, the naive, grateful bride-to-be, while she searched for a murderer. The betrothal dinner was held at her uncle's townhouse, a stifling affair of crystal and candlelight and forced pleasantries. Lillian wore white silk and pearls, the picture of demure femininity. Rowan arrived precisely on time, his expression unreadable. They greeted each other with appropriate formality, but when his hand touched hers, she felt the message. I'm here. We're in this together. The guests assembled in the dining room, 20 people, all carefully chosen. Lillian's uncle presided at the head of the table, puffed up with self-importance. Beside him sat Lord Radcliffe, the Ashford family solicitor, a thin man with cold eyes and a sharper mind. Lady Pemberton and her circle occupied the middle seats, watching everything with predatory interest. And at the far end, elegant and icy, sat Catherine Marlowe. Lillian took her place beside Rowan, hyper-aware of every glance, every whisper. The meal began, course after course of rich food she could barely taste. Conversation flowed around her, polite and poisonous. Such a whirlwind romance, Lady Pemberton said, her tone dripping false sweetness. One does wonder how you managed to capture the Duke's attention so thoroughly, Miss Hawke. I suppose we simply understood each other, Lillian replied evenly. How charming. And what do you understand about managing a ducal estate? The responsibilities are extensive. I'm a quick learner. Are you? Lord Radcliffe spoke for the first time, his voice dry as dust. The Ashford holdings are among the most complex in England. The late Duke's investments span 3 continents. His son, he nodded toward Rowan, has had little time to master the intricacies. I do hope you don't expect to contribute meaningfully to such matters. The insult was clear. Lillian's hands tightened on her fork. Rowan cut in smoothly. Miss Hawke has a keen mind for detail. I value her counsel. Do you? Catherine's voice was silk over stone. How progressive. Though I wonder if counsel is truly what you need, Rowan. James always said the duchy required strength, vision, not sentiment. James isn't here to say anything anymore. The temperature in the room dropped. Catherine's smile froze. No, she said softly. He isn't. A tragedy we all still mourn. Of course. Rowan's tone was perfectly neutral, but Lillian felt the tension radiating from him. Lord Radcliffe cleared his throat. Speaking of the estate, Your Grace, we still need your signature on several documents. The transfer of certain properties, the dissolution of partnerships your father established. I'm still reviewing them. You've been reviewing them for weeks. Some decisions cannot wait indefinitely. Then they'll wait a bit longer. Rowan's voice hardened. I won't sign anything until I understand every clause, every implication. My father may have been careless with the family assets. I won't be. A flash of something crossed Radcliffe's face, too quick to read. Anger? Fear? Your father built this legacy through trust and swift action, the solicitor said. Second-guessing every decision will only ensure I don't repeat his mistakes. Rowan leaned back in his chair. James would have wanted that. Wouldn't he, Lord Radcliffe, since you were his advisor as well? I served your family faithfully. I'm sure you did. The exchange was a minefield. Lillian watched the solicitor's face, looking for cracks in the mask. But the man was smooth, practiced. If he was hiding something, she couldn't see it. The meal dragged on. Lillian forced herself to eat, to smile, to nod at the appropriate moments. But beneath the table, her hands were clenched so tight, her nails drew blood. Finally, as dessert was being cleared, her uncle rose with a glass of port. A toast, he announced grandly, to the Duke of Ashford and my dear niece. May their union bring prosperity and honor to both families. Glasses were raised. Words of congratulation murmured. Lillian lifted her glass, the wine bitter on her tongue, and then she saw it. Catherine wasn't drinking. She held her glass, but her eyes were fixed on Rowan with an intensity that made Lillian's stomach clench. Not hatred. Not even anger. Hunger. The woman wanted something, desperately. Before Lillian could process it, Catherine stood. If I may say a few words? The room fell silent. James and I were to be married, Catherine began, her voice carrying effortlessly. We shared dreams of what the Ashford legacy could become. He was a man of vision, of principle. Her gaze slid to Lillian. He believed the duchy should be led by those who understood its history, its weight, its sacred duty. I'm sure he did, Rowan said flatly. I wonder if he would approve of this match. Catherine's smile was a blade. A girl with no fortune, no family of consequence, no understanding of what it means to carry such a name. Forgive me, Miss Hawke, but one must speak truth. You are unprepared. The room held its breath. Lillian felt every eye on her, felt the weight of judgment, the satisfaction of those who'd wanted her to fail. She could crumble, could let the tears come, prove Catherine right, or she could fight. You're right, Lillian said clearly. I am unprepared. I didn't grow up in this world. I don't know the secret rules or the right families or how to navigate your particular brand of cruelty. She stood, meeting Catherine's eyes directly. But I know what it's like to survive, to fight for every scrap of dignity when the world tells you you're worthless. And I know that titles and legacies mean nothing if the people holding them are hollow. Catherine's face went white. James is dead, Lillian continued, her voice steady despite the shaking in her hands. "You can invoke his memory all you like, but he's not here to defend himself or dictate who Rowan marries. And frankly, Lady Catherine, your grief seems less about honoring James and more about controlling what you've lost." Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Then Catherine smiled. "How extraordinary! The little bird has claws. When necessary." "Good." Catherine set down her glass with deliberate care. "You'll need them. The world you're entering devours the weak. And make no mistake, Miss Hawke, you are still very, very weak." She glided from the room, leaving chaos in her wake. The dinner dissolved shortly after. Guests made hurried excuses, fleeing the awkwardness. Lillian's uncle was livid, his face purple with rage, but Rowan intervened before he could unleash his tirade. "I'll handle this," the Duke said coldly. "Miss Hawke is under my protection now. If you have complaints, direct them to me." Her uncle sputtered, but there was nothing he could do. Rowan was a duke. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Within an hour, the house was empty. Lillian sat in the drawing room, trembling with adrenaline crash. Rowan poured her brandy without asking. "Drink." She did. The liquid burned going down. "That was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid," he said. "Probably both. Catherine will retaliate. Let her." Lillian looked up at him. "Did you see her face when I mentioned James? She wasn't mourning. She was furious." "I noticed. What if she's involved? What if she knows something about his death?" "It's possible." Rowan sat beside her, exhaustion etched in every line. "But we need proof. Real, tangible evidence, not just suspicions." "Then we find it." She set down the glass. "Ashford House, your brother's belongings. There has to be something, letters, documents, anything that tells us what he uncovered." "I've looked. There's nothing." "Then we look again. Together." He studied her. "This is dangerous, Lillian. After tonight, whoever's behind this knows you're not going to be a silent ornament. They'll see you as a threat." "Good. I'm tired of being invisible." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, admiration, maybe something deeper. "You're insane," says the man who married a woman he met while naked in a pond. "We're not married yet. Details." For the first time in days, he laughed. It was brief, ragged, but real. "All right," he said finally. "We search Ashford House, but carefully, and if things get too dangerous, we face it together." She held out her hand. "Partners." He took it. "Partners." They made plans to visit Ashford House the following week, under the guise of Lillian inspecting her future home. But 3 days before the scheduled trip, everything changed. Lillian was walking through Mayfair when she noticed the man following her. He wasn't subtle, a heavy figure in a dark coat, keeping pace half a block behind. When she turned, he turned. When she stopped, he stopped. Fear spiked. She quickened her pace, angling toward busier streets. But the man stayed with her, relentless. She was debating whether to scream when a hand caught her elbow. "Keep walking." A woman's voice, low and urgent. "Don't look at him." Lillian glanced sideways. The woman from before, the one who'd brought the locket. Older, rough around the edges, with eyes that had seen too much. "What?" "You stirred the hornet's nest, girl. They're watching you now, all of you." She pressed something into Lillian's hand. "James left this with me before he died. Said if anything happened, I should give it to someone who'd fight, someone who wouldn't back down." Lillian looked down. A key. Small, brass, unmarked. "What does it open?" "A box. In the East Wing Library at Ashford House, hidden behind the third bookshelf, bottom right panel. He kept his real records there, the ones that prove what they did." "Who? Who are they?" "Lord Radcliffe, Lady Catherine's brother, maybe others. James was going to expose them, embezzlement, fraud, worse. But they found out." The woman's grip tightened. "They killed him to keep him quiet. And they'll kill you too if you're not careful." "Why are you helping me?" "Because James was a good man. And because I'm tired of watching powerful people destroy anyone who stands in their way." She released Lillian's arm. "Go to the house. Find the box. get proof, then burn it all down. Before Lillian could respond, the woman vanished into the crowd. The man in the dark coat was closer now, too close. Lillian didn't think. She ran. She darted into an alley, then another, her lungs burning. Behind her, footsteps pounded. She burst onto a main street and nearly collided with a carriage. "Miss Hawke!" She looked up. Rowan leaned out of his own carriage, his face tight with concern. "Get in, now!" She didn't argue. She scrambled inside and he shouted at the driver to move. The carriage lurched forward. Through the back window, Lillian saw the man in the dark coat standing in the street, watching them go. "What happened?" Rowan demanded. She was shaking too hard to answer. She pressed the key into his hand instead. He stared at it. "What is this?" "Proof," she gasped. "Your brother's proof. Hidden at Ashford House. We have to go. Now." "Lillian, they're watching us. They know we're looking. If we don't move fast, they'll destroy the evidence or kill us or both. We have to go tonight." He looked at her. Really looked. Saw the fear, the determination, the desperation. "Tonight," he agreed. Ashford House loomed against the night sky, dark and silent. They arrived after midnight, leaving the carriage at the gates and approaching on foot. Rowan had sent the servants away, claiming renovations. The house was empty, or should have been. They entered through a side door, moving quietly through shadowed halls. Lillian's heart hammered with every creak of floorboards. Rowan led the way to the East Wing Library, a cavernous room lined with shelves that stretched to a vaulted ceiling. "Third shelf," Lillian whispered. "Bottom right panel." They found it. Rowan knelt, running his hands along the wood until he found a seam. He pried it open, revealing a hollow space. Inside, a small iron box. The key fit perfectly. Rowan opened it. Inside were documents, ledgers, letters, bank records. He spread them on the floor, and in the moonlight streaming through the windows they read. Evidence of systematic theft. Money siphoned from estate accounts into private holdings. Investments manipulated. Properties sold at fractions of their value to shell companies controlled by Lord Radcliffe and Catherine's family. Millions of pounds, stolen over decades. "My father never knew," Rowan breathed. "He trusted them, and they bled him dry." "James found out," Lillian said. "That's why they killed him." A sound froze them both. Footsteps. In the hallway outside, Rowan shoved the documents back into the box and grabbed Lillian's hand. "Move!" They ran, but as they reached the library doors, they swung open. Lord Radcliffe stood in the doorway, flanked by two men. Behind them, elegant and cold, stood Catherine Marlowe. "Your Grace," Radcliffe said pleasantly. "Working late?" Rowan stepped in front of Lillian. "Get out of my house." "Your house?" Catherine laughed. "Oh, Rowan, you still don't understand. This was never your house. Your father was a pawn. Your brother was a liability. And you—" Her eyes glittered. "You're an obstacle we're about to remove." The men moved forward. Rowan shoved Lillian toward the windows. "Run!" Glass shattered as she threw a chair through the pane. She didn't think, just climbed through, cutting her hands on broken shards. Behind her, she heard shouting, the thud of fists. "Rowan! Go!" She hit the ground running, the box clutched to her chest, her dress tearing on branches. Behind her, the house erupted in chaos. More shouting, a gunshot that cracked the night. Terror drove her forward. She ran blindly through the gardens, through the gates, onto the road. A carriage appeared. Their carriage, the driver wide-eyed. "Miss, what? Drive! Now!" She threw herself inside just as another shot rang out. The carriage lurched forward, horses screaming. Lillian looked back. Rowan was on the ground. 3 men surrounded him, and Catherine stood over him, something glinting in her hand. A knife. The carriage rounded a bend, and they were gone. Lillian sat in the darkness, clutching the box, blood dripping from her hands. She'd gotten the proof, but she'd left Rowan behind, and she had no idea if he was still alive. The carriage careened through the darkness, wheels rattling over uneven road. Lillian pressed herself against the seat, the iron box clutched so tight her knuckles went white. Blood from her cut hand smeared across the metal, sticky and warm. Her breath came in ragged gasps that had nothing to do with running and everything to do with the image seared into her brain. Rowan on the ground, surrounded, Catherine standing over him with steel in her hand. "Stop," she choked out. The driver didn't hear, or chose not to. "Stop the carriage!" The horses slowed. The driver twisted around, his face pale in the moonlight. "Miss, we can't go back." "I'm not asking you to." Her mind raced, fighting through panic to find clarity. "Take me to Lord Pemberton's house." "But, miss, now!" She leaned forward, and something in her voice made him flinch. "Lady Pemberton hates me, but she hates scandal more, and she has connections to every magistrate in London. If I show up bleeding on her doorstep with proof of murder and theft, she'll move heaven and earth to protect her own reputation." The driver stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. "Drive," she said. He drove. 20 minutes later, they pulled up to the Pemberton townhouse, a sprawling Georgian monument to wealth and status. Every window blazed with light. A party. Of course. The woman never missed an opportunity to remind London of her importance. Lillian climbed out of the carriage, her torn dress and bloody hands drawing horrified stares from guests arriving in their finery. She ignored them, marching straight up the steps. The butler tried to stop her. "Miss, you cannot—" She pushed past him into the entrance hall. Conversations died. Women gasped. A man dropped his champagne flute. "I need to see Lady Pemberton," Lillian announced. "Immediately." From the drawing room, a familiar voice cut through the stunned silence. "What on earth is going on out here?" Lady Pemberton appeared in the doorway, resplendent in emerald silk. Her eyes widened at the sight of Lillian, disheveled, bleeding, wild-eyed. "Miss Hawke, what is the meaning of—" "The Duke of Ashford has been attacked," Lillian said clearly, "at his own estate, by his solicitor and Lady Catherine Marlowe. They murdered his brother. They've been stealing from the family for years. And if we don't act now, they're going to kill him too." Dead silence. Lady Pemberton's face went through several expressions: shock, disbelief, calculation. Then her eyes dropped to the box in Lillian's hands. "Is that proof?" "Yes." "How certain are you?" "I watched them try to kill us both." The woman's jaw tightened. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she turned to the assembled guests. "Lord Harrington, Lord Blackwood, with me. Everyone else, remain here. If word of this leaves this house before I say so, I will personally destroy whoever speaks." The threat was clear. No one moved. Lady Pemberton strode toward Lillian, her expression unreadable. "My study, now Mum." The study was all dark wood and leather, the air thick with the scent of tobacco and old money. Lady Pemberton shut the door behind them, then locked it. Lord Harrington and Lord Blackwood, both senior magistrates, both men whose word carried weight in Parliament, stood by the fireplace, their faces grave. "Show us," Lady Pemberton commanded. Lillian set the box on the desk with shaking hands. Her fingers left bloody smears on the lid as she opened it and spread the documents out. The men read in silence. Minutes ticked by, marked by the steady tick of the mantel clock. Lillian stood there, trying not to collapse, trying not to think about Rowan bleeding on the library floor. Finally, Lord Harrington looked up. "This is damning, if it's authentic." "It's my brother-in-law's handwriting," said Lord Blackwood quietly. "He did business with the Ashford estate. That's James's signature, no question. Lord Radcliffe has been the family's solicitor for 30 years, Lady Pemberton murmured, scanning a ledger. "Trusted implicitly. If this is real, if he's been embezzling, the scandal will be catastrophic." "More catastrophic than a duke being murdered in his own home?" Lillian's voice cracked. "They killed James Ashford when he discovered the theft. Tonight they tried to kill Rowan and me. We have to stop them." "We will." Lady Pemberton's tone was ice. "But we must be strategic. Radcliffe has powerful friends. Catherine's family has influence. If we move without absolute certainty, they'll bury this and us with it." "Then what do we do?" Lord Harrington stepped forward. "We gather more witnesses, servants who saw things, financial experts who can authenticate these records. We build a case so airtight they can't escape it. That will take days, maybe weeks." Lillian's hands clenched. "Rowan doesn't have that kind of time." "The Duke is resourceful," Lady Pemberton said. "He survived years in the Americas. He can survive one night." You don't know that. No, I don't. The woman met her eyes. But I know that if you charge back to Ashford House alone, you'll die. And these documents will disappear, and Radcliffe will spin a story about a disturbed young woman who attacked a respectable solicitor and tragically came to harm. She leaned closer. Is that what you want? To throw away the only leverage we have? Lillian wanted to scream. To hit something. To tear the whole world apart. But Lady Pemberton was right. What do you need from me? She asked, hating how small her voice sounded. First, you stay here, out of sight. If Radcliffe or Catherine think you've gone to the authorities, they'll accelerate whatever they're planning. Lady Pemberton turned to the magistrates. Lord Harrington, send riders to Ashford House. Discreetly. Have them observe but not engage. If the Duke is alive, we need to know his status. And if he's not, then we have a murder investigation on our hands, and these documents become evidence in a capital crime. Lord Blackwood nodded grimly. I'll contact the chief magistrate, quietly. He'll want to handle this personally. A duke's murder, aristocratic corruption. It's explosive. Good. Lady Pemberton looked back at Lillian. You, Miss Hawke, are going to write down everything you witnessed tonight, every detail, every word spoken. It will serve as testimony. I want to do more than write. I'm sure you do, but right now staying alive and protecting that evidence is the most important thing you can do. The woman's expression softened slightly, barely perceptible, but there. The Duke chose well when he chose you. You're braver than I gave you credit for. Don't waste that bravery on a suicide mission. It wasn't comfort, but it was respect. From a woman who'd tried to destroy her just days ago. Lillian nodded. All right. I'll write. She spent the rest of the night in Lady Pemberton's study, recording everything in painstaking detail. Her hands shook from exhaustion and shock, but she forced herself to be thorough. Every conversation, every threat, the chase through London, the hidden box. Catherine's cold smile as she stood over Rowan. By dawn, her testimony filled 10 pages. A servant brought news around 6. Lord Harrington's riders had returned from Ashford House. The estate appeared quiet. No bodies had been found. But there were signs of struggle in the library. Broken furniture, bloodstains, and several horses were missing from the stables. He escaped, Lillian breathed. Or was taken, Lord Blackwood said grimly. We won't know until we find him. But Lillian felt it in her bones. Rowan was alive. He had to be. She'd know if he wasn't. She'd feel it. Lady Pemberton entered with fresh clothes. You can't stay in that dress. It's covered in blood and draws too much attention. Change. Eat something. Then we wait. Wait for what? For the chief magistrate to arrive. For our financial experts to examine the documents. For the trap to close. The woman's smile was thin and sharp. Radcliffe and Catherine think they've won. Let them believe it. Arrogance makes people careless. The chief magistrate had arrived at noon, a severe man with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He read through the documents without expression, asked pointed questions, and examined the testimony Lillian had written. Finally, he looked up. This is sufficient to bring charges: embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy to commit murder. But without the Duke's testimony or physical evidence of an attack, it's circumstantial. What about the blood in the library? Lillian demanded. Could be explained away. A writing accident, a dispute between servants. He held up a hand to forestall her protest. I believe you, Miss Hawke, but in court, belief isn't enough. We need irrefutable proof. Then find him. Her voice broke. Find Rowan. He'll testify. He saw everything. We're looking. Every constable in London has his description. If he's in the city, we'll locate him. And if he's not? The magistrate's expression remained neutral. Then we proceed with what we have and hope it's enough. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was all she was going to get. 3 days passed. 3 days of waiting, of pacing Lady Pemberton's guest room like a caged animal, of starting at every knock on the door. The documents were authenticated, genuine, damning, irrefutable. Warrants were issued for Lord Radcliffe's arrest. Catherine's assets were frozen pending investigation, but neither of them could be found, and neither could Rowan. On the 4th morning, Lillian woke to shouting downstairs. She threw on a dressing gown and ran. In the entrance hall, a man stood arguing with Lady Pemberton's butler. He was filthy, unshaven, his clothes torn and stained with mud and worse. But Lillian would have known him anywhere. "Rowan!" He turned. Relief flooded his face so visceral it made her knees weak. She flew down the stairs and crashed into him. He caught her, held her so tight she couldn't breathe, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them, alive together, whole. "You're alive," she gasped against his chest. "So are you." His voice was rough, exhausted. "I wasn't sure. When the carriage disappeared, I thought, I went to Lady Pemberton. I gave her the documents. We have proof, Rowan. We have everything." He pulled back just enough to look at her, and she saw the bruises on his face, the cut along his jaw, the exhaustion etched into every line. "What happened after you got stabbed and thrown off a terrace?" Lady Pemberton's voice cut in dryly. She stood in the doorway to her study, arms crossed. "Do come in, Your Grace. You're bleeding on my floor." Over hot tea and clean bandages, Rowan told his story. He'd fought off Radcliffe's men long enough to escape through a servant's passage. Catherine had tried to stop him, hence the knife wound in his side. Shallow, but painful. He'd made it to the stables, stolen a horse, and ridden hard for London. But Radcliffe had anticipated that. Men were waiting on the road. Rowan had been forced to take back routes through woods and farms, avoiding main thoroughfares. He'd hidden in a barn for 2 days, feverish from the wound, before finally making it to the city. "I went to my townhouse first," he said. "It was being watched, so I came here. Figured if Lillian was anywhere, it would be where the scandal was." "Astute," Lady Pemberton said. "Miss Hawke has been staying under my protection, along with evidence of Lord Radcliffe's embezzlement and your brother's murder." Rowan's eyes sharpened. "You believe us?" "The Chief Magistrate believes you. The documents are authentic. Warrants have been issued." She poured more tea with brisk efficiency. "However, Radcliffe and Lady Catherine have vanished, which means they're either fleeing the country or planning something desperate." "They'll run," Lillian said. "They know we have proof. They have to." "Maybe," Rowan's jaw tightened, "or they'll try to eliminate the witnesses before the trial." "They can't touch you here," Lady Pemberton said firmly. "This house is watched. The magistrates know where you are. Any attack would be suicide." "That won't stop Catherine." Rowan looked at Lillian. "She's obsessed. She thinks the Ashford legacy belongs to her through James. She won't walk away quietly." A chill ran down Lillian's spine. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to end this. Now, before she hurts anyone else." "How?" He was silent for a moment. Then, "We draw her out. Give her a target she can't resist." "Absolutely not," Lady Pemberton snapped. "You are not using yourself as bait. Not me." Rowan's eyes met Lillian's. "Us. Together. A public appearance. The engagement that was supposed to happen before all this went to hell. We announce it formally. Make a spectacle. Force her hand." "That's insane," Lillian breathed. "It's the only way. Catherine won't be able to stay hidden if we're parading the thing she hates most, our marriage, in front of all of London. Her pride won't let her." Lady Pemberton looked between them. "You're both mad." "Probably," Rowan agreed. "But it will work. And if it doesn't, if she comes with more than just pride, with hired killers or worse, then we'll be ready." He turned to Lillian. "If you don't want to do this, I understand. It's a risk. I'm in." "Lillian, I'm in." She squared her shoulders. "We finished this together. That was the deal." He studied her face, then nodded. "Together." Lady Pemberton sighed. "I'm going to regret this. But if you're determined to be reckless fools, at least let me do it properly. I'll host the announcement. A ball, tomorrow night. Every magistrate, every witness we've gathered, every member of society who matters. We'll surround you with so many people that Catherine can't strike without exposing herself. And the chief magistrate? We'll have men stationed throughout the house, hidden, waiting." Her smile was cold. "If Catherine Marlowe wants to destroy you, she'll have to do it in front of everyone, and that will be her downfall." The next 24 hours were chaos. Invitations sent, arrangements made. Lillian was fitted for a new gown, white silk and silver thread, a dress designed to make a statement. Rowan met with the chief magistrate and his men, planning security, contingencies, worst-case scenarios. And through it all, Lillian felt the weight of what they were about to do. "Are you scared?" Rowan asked that evening. They stood in Lady Pemberton's garden, stealing a moment of quiet before the storm. "Terrified," she admitted. "Me too." She looked at him, this man who'd become her partner, her ally, maybe something more in the wreckage of conspiracy and murder. "What happens after? If we survive this?" "I don't know." He was quiet. "I never planned past tomorrow." "Neither did I." "We could figure it out. Together." "Is that what you want?" He turned to face her fully. "I want you to be safe. I want the people who killed my brother to pay, and I want—" He stopped, started again. "When this started, you were a convenience, a solution to a problem. But somewhere along the way, you became the most real thing in my life. So yes, I want to figure out what comes next. With you." Her throat tightened. "Rowan, you don't have to answer now. Just think about it. After tomorrow, when we're not running for our lives." She nodded, not trusting her voice. He kissed her forehead, gentle, careful, a promise, and walked back inside. Lillian stood in the garden alone, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow, they would face Catherine. Radcliffe. The whole web of lies and murder that had tried to consume them. And after that maybe they could finally breathe. The Pemberton ballroom glittered like a jewel box. Candles everywhere, music drifting from a string quartet, guests in their finest. Lillian descended the stairs on Rowan's arm, and the crowd parted before them. Whispers followed. She heard her name, his, fragments of speculation and scandal, but she kept her head high, her hand steady on his sleeve. Lady Pemberton stood at the center of the room, magnificent and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please." The music stopped. Silence fell. "It is my honor to announce the formal betrothal of His Grace, the Duke of Ashford, and Miss Lillian Hawke." Applause rippled through the crowd, polite, measured, laced with curiosity. Rowan stepped forward. "Thank you all for coming. Recent weeks have been difficult. My family has faced tragedy and betrayal. But through it all, Miss Hawke has stood beside me. Her courage, her intelligence, her refusal to be cowed by those who would see us destroyed, these are the qualities I value. These are the reasons I am proud to call her my future Duchess." More applause. Lillian saw faces in the crowd, some genuinely moved, some skeptical, some calculating. She searched for Catherine, but saw nothing. Maybe she wouldn't come. Maybe— Glass shattered. The ballroom doors burst open. Catherine Marlowe stood in the entrance, disheveled and wild-eyed, flanked by two rough-looking men. "No," she said, her voice carrying across the stunned silence. "No, you don't get to do this." Rowan moved in front of Lillian. "Catherine, don't." "Don't what? Stand here and watch you marry that nothing?" Catherine's laugh was jagged, broken. "James would be ashamed. You've destroyed everything he built, everything we were supposed to have." "James is dead because you and Radcliffe stole from my family," Rowan said clearly, projecting for the entire room. "Because he discovered your theft and you killed him to keep it quiet." Gasps, shocked murmurs. Catherine's face went white, then red. "You can't prove that." "We can." Lillian stepped out from behind Rowan. "We have the documents. Your signatures. Your brother's financial records. Everything." "Lies." But Catherine's voice shook. "The Chief Magistrate has already issued warrants for your arrest," Lady Pemberton said coldly. "Confess or don't. It doesn't matter. You're finished." For a moment, Catherine just stood there. Then her hand moved to her bodice, and Lillian saw the glint of steel. "If I can't have the legacy," Catherine said softly, "neither can you." She lunged. Rowan shoved Lillian aside. The knife flashed. Screams erupted. But before Catherine could strike, men in plain clothes surged from the crowd, the Chief Magistrate's officers. They tackled her, wrestled the blade away. Her men tried to fight but were quickly overwhelmed. Catherine struggled, screaming obscenities, her composure shattered completely. "This was mine. James promised me. You're nothing. Nothing." "Get her out of here," the Chief Magistrate ordered. They dragged her away, still screaming. The room was in chaos. Guests shouting, servants rushing to help, Lady Pemberton barking orders. Lillian stood frozen, her ears ringing. Rowan caught her hands. "Are you hurt?" No. She looked up at him. "Is it over?" "Not yet. Radcliffe's still out there, but Catherine's confession just sealed both their fates. She'll hang." "Yes." Lillian should have felt triumph, justice, something. Instead, she just felt tired. Lady Pemberton appeared at her elbow. "Well, that was dramatic." "Are you all right?" Rowan asked the older woman. "My ballroom will need redecorating, but otherwise, yes." She surveyed the chaos with grim satisfaction. You were right. Her pride was her downfall. And Radcliffe? Was arrested an hour ago trying to board a ship to France. We let Catherine come here to draw her out, but we had him the whole time. She smiled thinly. "You're not the only ones who can set a trap." Over the next hour, order was restored. The guests, those who hadn't fled, buzzed with the scandal. The chief magistrate took statements. Lady Pemberton assured everyone that justice would be swift and public. And through it all, Lillian stood beside Rowan, their hands clasped tight. When it was finally over, when the last guest had left and the house had fallen silent, Lady Pemberton found them in the garden. "The magistrate believes you'll both need to testify at trial," she said, "but he's confident of conviction. Between the documents, Catherine's public confession, and Radcliffe's flight, it's as airtight as these things get." "Thank you," Rowan said, "for everything." "Don't thank me yet. The scandal is going to be spectacular. Your family's name will be dragged through every paper in England. You'll be scrutinized, questioned, pitied, and gossiped about for months." "I can handle it," Lillian said quietly. Lady Pemberton studied her. "Yes, I believe you can." A pause. "I misjudged you, Miss Hawke. I thought you were a fortune hunter, a nobody trying to climb above her station. I was wrong. I was a nobody. No, you were underestimated. There's a difference." The woman's expression softened slightly. "You'll make a formidable duchess. This city needs more women who don't break under pressure." Coming from Lady Pemberton, it was the highest compliment imaginable. "Now go," she said. "Both of you, rest. You've earned it." They walked through the quiet streets toward Rowan's townhouse, the first light of dawn breaking over London. "Do you think it's really over?" Lillian asked. "The immediate danger, yes, but the fallout, the trials, the rebuilding?" He shook his head. "That's just beginning." "Are you ready for it? With you beside me?" "I think so." He stopped, turned to face her. "I meant what I said last night. I want to figure this out, together. Not because we're trapped or cornered or running, but because I choose you, and I'm hoping you'll choose me." Lillian looked at this man who'd started as a stranger, become an ally, and somehow turned into her home. "I already did. In a library. Remember?" He smiled, genuine, warm, unguarded. "Best decision you ever made." "Second best," she corrected. "The first was not drowning you in that pond." He laughed, and the sound chased away the last shadows of the night. As the sun rose over London, casting gold across the rooftops, Lillian Hawke, soon to be the Duchess of Ashford, felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. And the certainty that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Hope was a dangerous thing. Lillian had learned that early. Hope made you vulnerable, made you believe in futures that could be snatched away. But standing beside Rowan as dawn broke over London, she let herself feel it anyway, just for a moment. Then reality came crashing back. The trial was set for 3 weeks out. 3 weeks of preparation, of reliving every terrible moment, of being dissected by solicitors and stared at by strangers. 3 weeks of her name in every scandal sheet, every drawing room, every whispered conversation across the city. The headlines started the morning after Catherine's arrest. Duke's fiancé foils murder plot read 1. Lady Catherine Marlowe arrested in shocking ballroom attack screamed another. And the worst, from nobody to Duchess, the girl who saved Ashford. "They make it sound like a fairy tale," Lillian muttered, throwing the paper across Rowan's study. "Isn't it?" He glanced up from the correspondence he was sorting. Letters from solicitors, magistrates, distant family members crawling out of the woodwork now that the scandal was public. Fairy tales don't include embezzlement and attempted murder. "The good ones do." He smiled faintly. "But I take your point. She paced the room, unable to sit still. Her uncle had sent 3 letters demanding she return home immediately, each more threatening than the last. Lady Pemberton had sent one offering continued protection and a thinly veiled warning not to appear weak before the trial. Even people Lillian had never met felt entitled to her story, her choices, her future. "I hate this," she said quietly. "Which part?" "All of it. Being watched, being talked about. Having strangers decide whether I'm worthy or fortunate or just opportunistic." Rowan set down his pen. "You don't owe them anything. Not explanations, not gratitude, not performance." "Don't I?" She turned to face him. "I'm about to become a duchess. That comes with expectations, responsibilities. If I can't handle being talked about, how am I supposed to handle?" She gestured vaguely at the stacks of papers, the weight of the title, everything it represented, the same way you've handled everything else. He stood, crossed to her. "By refusing to break." "I feel pretty broken right now." "You're not." His hand settled on her shoulders, steady and warm. "You're exhausted, overwhelmed, but not broken. There's a difference." She wanted to believe him, but the fear sat heavy in her chest. What if she couldn't do this? What if she'd fought so hard to claim a future she wasn't equipped to survive? A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. The butler entered with a sealed letter. "For Miss Hawke," hand delivered. Lillian took it with trembling fingers. No return address, just her name in elegant script. She broke the seal and read, "Miss Hawke, my name is Eleanor Grant. I was a maid at Ashford House when the late Duke was alive. I have information about James Ashford's death that was not included in the documents you recovered. If you wish to hear it, meet me at St. Margaret's Church, Whitechapel, tomorrow at noon. Come alone. I will not contact you again." Lillian's blood ran cold. She handed the letter to Rowan without a word. He read it, his expression darkening. "It's a trap." "Maybe. Definitely. Catherine's in custody, but she has allies. This could be anyone trying to lure you out. Or it could be a witness we missed, someone who knows something that could strengthen the case." She met his eyes. "We can't ignore it. I'm not letting you walk into an ambush." "Then don't let me go alone." "The letter says—" "I don't care what it says." Lillian's voice hardened. "If this woman has real information, she'll talk to both of us or neither. And if it's a trap, I'd rather face it with you than wonder for the rest of my life what we missed." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Together." St. Margaret's Church sat in one of Whitechapel's grimmer corners, soot-stained stone, narrow windows, the kind of place people went when they'd run out of better options. Lillian and Rowan arrived just before noon, dressed plainly to avoid attention. Inside, the church was cold and dim. Rows of empty pews stretched toward a simple altar. A woman knelt in the front row, her head bowed. Lillian's footsteps echoed on stone as she approached. "Miss Grant?" The woman looked up. She was perhaps 40, with tired eyes and work-worn hands. "You brought him." "I don't walk into unknown situations alone anymore." Lillian slid into the pew beside her, Rowan standing watchful behind them. "You said you have information." "I do." Eleanor's gaze flicked to Rowan. "I'm sorry for your loss, Your Grace. Your brother was a good man." "Thank you." Rowan's voice was carefully neutral. "What do you know about his death?" Eleanor took a shaky breath. "I was there the morning he died. I was cleaning the East Wing when I heard shouting from his study. Lord Radcliffe and another man, I didn't recognize him. They were arguing with Mr. James about the ledgers." Lillian leaned forward. "What did they say?" "Mr. James accused them of theft, said he had proof they'd been siphoning money for years. The other man got angry, said James was threatening the wrong people, that he should walk away while he still could. And James refused. He said he'd go to the magistrates, expose everything. The other man—" She swallowed. "He said that would be a mistake. That accidents happen to people who made too much noise." "Did James seem frightened?" "No, determined. He told them to leave his house, said he'd give them one day to return what they'd stolen, and after that he was going to the authorities regardless." Rowan's hands clenched, and the next morning he was dead. Eleanor nodded, tears tracking down her face. His horse was found with a burr under its saddle. Someone put it there deliberately, made the horse bolt. Mr. James was an expert rider, but no one could stay on a panicked animal running full speed through the woods. "Did you tell anyone?" Lillian asked gently. "I tried. I went to the housekeeper, then the steward. They told me I was imagining things, that I'd be dismissed if I spread rumors." Her voice broke. "I should have done more. Should have gone to the magistrates myself. But I was scared. I had a daughter to feed, and no one would hire a maid who'd accused a nobleman of murder." "You're telling us now," Rowan said. "That takes courage. It's too late for Mr. James, but maybe it's not too late for justice." She looked at Lillian. "I read about what you did, how you stood up to them. I thought, if you could be brave, maybe I could too." Lillian's throat tightened. "Will you testify?" "If you protect my daughter, get her somewhere safe before the trial. I won't risk her life for this." "Done." Rowan's tone left no room for argument. "Tell me where she is. I'll have her moved to a property of mine in Scotland. Remote, guarded, comfortable. She'll stay there until the trial's over and it's safe to return." Eleanor's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you. Thank you." They spent the next hour taking down her testimony in meticulous detail, names, dates, everything she remembered. By the time they left the church, they had enough to destroy Radcliffe's defense completely. Outside, Rowan pulled Lillian into an alley, his expression fierce. "You were right. If we'd ignored that letter—" "We didn't," she managed to smile. "We're getting good at this, the whole partnership thing." "We are." He cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I'm starting to think we might actually survive this. Don't jinx it." He kissed her then, quick, hard, full of everything they couldn't say. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. "Whatever happens in that courtroom, we walk out together. Deal?" "Deal." Os. The days before the trial crawled by with agonizing slowness. Lillian spent hours with the prosecution team, rehearsing her testimony, answering endless questions. At night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling of Lady Pemberton's guest room, her mind replaying every moment of that night at Ashford House. Rowan visited daily, bringing news and what little comfort he could offer. His own preparations were just as grueling: meetings with solicitors, interviews with investigators, the constant pressure of public scrutiny. "They're calling you a hero in some papers," he told her one afternoon, his tone bitter, as if this was some kind of adventure story instead of people trying to kill us. "And what are they calling me?" Lillian asked. "Depends on the paper. Half say you're brave and clever. The other half suggest you orchestrated the whole thing to trap a wealthy husband." She laughed without humor. "Of course they do. Does it bother you?" "Less than it should, maybe." She looked out the window at the gray London sky. "I spent so long being invisible that being talked about, even badly, feels almost like existing. Does that make sense?" "Unfortunately, yes." They sat in silence for a while, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Finally, Rowan spoke again. "Eleanor's daughter is safe. Arrived in Scotland 2 days ago. The estate manager says she's settling in well." "Good. That's one less thing to worry about." "The list is getting shorter. Or longer, depending on how you count." He smiled faintly. "Ever the optimist. I learned from the best." The trial began on a cold morning in late October. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, aristocrats, curiosity seekers, all crammed into every available space. Lillian sat in the witness gallery beside Lady Pemberton, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles went white. Rowan sat at the prosecution's table, his face a mask of controlled fury. Lord Radcliffe and Lady Catherine sat in the dock, both dressed impeccably, both radiating contempt. Catherine wouldn't look at Lillian. Radcliffe stared straight ahead, his expression blank. The prosecutor stood, a sharp-eyed man named Hastings who'd built a career on high-profile cases. "Your Honor, members of the jury, this is a case about greed, betrayal, and murder. Over the course of these proceedings, we will prove that the defendant systematically embezzled millions of pounds from the Ashford estate. That when James Ashford discovered their theft, they murdered him. And that when his brother, the current Duke of Ashford, began investigating, they attempted to murder him as well." Radcliffe's solicitor objected immediately. Conjecture and theatrics, Your Honor. The prosecution has no direct evidence of murder. We have witnesses, Hastings countered, testimony, financial records signed by both defendants, and a confession made by Lady Catherine in front of over 100 witnesses at the Pemberton ball. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel. Proceed, Mr. Hastings. The prosecution's case unfolded over 3 days. Financial experts testified about the embezzlement, the shell companies, the falsified records, the systematic theft spanning decades. Each revelation drew gasps from the gallery. The amounts were staggering. 2 million pounds, maybe more, enough to bankrupt lesser estates entirely. One expert, a dry accountant named Morrison, walked the jury through page after page of ledgers. Here, you can see a transfer of 50,000 pounds to a company called Marlowe Trading. It doesn't exist. The money was deposited into an account controlled by Lord Radcliffe and Lady Catherine's brother. Here, another transfer, 75,000 to a property investment that was never made. The pattern repeats hundreds of times over 20 years. And the late Duke never noticed? Hastings asked. The old Duke was not a meticulous man, Morrison said carefully. He trusted his solicitor implicitly. That trust was systematically abused. The defense tried to poke holes in the testimony, suggesting errors in accounting, innocent mistakes, misunderstandings. But the evidence was overwhelming. Document after document, signature after signature, all painting a picture of deliberate, calculated theft. Then Eleanor Grant took the stand. She wore a simple gray dress, her hands folded in her lap, her voice steady despite visible nerves. Hastings guided her through her testimony gently, what she'd heard, what she'd seen, the threats made against James. And you're certain it was Lord Radcliffe you heard arguing with Mr. Ashford? Hastings asked. Absolutely certain. I'd worked in that house for 15 years. I knew his voice. What about the other man? I didn't recognize him then, but I saw him later at Mr. James's funeral. He was standing with Lady Catherine. She introduced him as her brother, Lord Edward Marlowe. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Catherine's face went white, then red. The defense's cross-examination was brutal. Catherine's solicitor, a weasel of a man named Thornton, tried to paint Eleanor as a disgruntled servant making up stories for attention or money. Isn't it true you were dismissed from Ashford House 6 months after James Ashford's death? He asked. Yes. For theft. Eleanor's jaw tightened. For speaking out of turn. I questioned the circumstances of Mr. James's death. The new steward, hired by Lord Radcliffe, didn't appreciate it. How convenient. A dismissed servant with a grudge, suddenly remembering damning evidence years later. I remembered it the day it happened, Eleanor shot back. I was just too scared to speak until now. Or too greedy. How much is the Duke of Ashford paying you for this testimony? Nothing. He protected my daughter, that's all I asked for. A valuable favor, surely. A property in Scotland, guards, expenses paid. Sounds like payment to me. Eleanor's hands trembled, but her voice stayed steady. My daughter is 8 years old. After what happened to Mr. James, I wasn't going to risk her safety by testifying without protection. If that makes me a bad person in your eyes, I can live with that. But it doesn't make what I saw any less true. The exchange left the courtroom murmuring. Some jurors looked skeptical. Others seemed moved by Eleanor's defiance. When she stepped down, Lillian caught her eye and mouthed, "Thank you." Eleanor nodded once, then disappeared into the crowd. Then it was Lillian's turn. She walked to the witness box on legs that felt like water. The room was silent except for the scratch of journalists' pens. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Hastings approached with a reassuring nod. Miss Hawke, please describe the events of the night you discovered the hidden documents at Ashford House. She did. Every detail. The woman who'd given her the key, the hidden box, the evidence of theft, the confrontation in the library, Radcliffe and Catherine's threats. The chase. Rowan's blood on the floor. Her voice stayed steady through most of it, but cracked when she described watching Rowan fall, surrounded, Catherine standing over him with a knife. I thought he was dead, she said quietly. I thought I'd lost him. But you didn't stop. You took the evidence and ran. I had to. It was the only way to make his death, to make James's death mean something. If I'd stayed, they would have killed me too, and no one would ever know the truth. And what was Lady Catherine's demeanor during this confrontation? Hastings asked. Triumphant. She thought they'd won. She said, Lillian's voice steadied. She said the Ashford legacy belonged to her through James, that Rowan was an obstacle they were going to remove. Objection! Thornton shot to his feet. Hearsay and inflammatory. Overruled, the judge said. The witness is recounting direct statements made to her. Continue, Miss Hawke. Lillian described the knife, the violence, the escape. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Then the defense began their cross-examination. Thornton circled her like a predator. Miss Hawke, isn't it true that you had significant financial incentive to discredit Lady Catherine? I don't understand the question. You were engaged to marry the Duke. If Lady Catherine's claim to the Ashford legacy had merit, your own position would be threatened. Isn't that motive to fabricate evidence against her? Anger flared hot in Lillian's chest. I didn't fabricate anything. The documents were hidden by James Ashford himself. Eleanor Grant witnessed the threats made against him. None of that has anything to do with me. Doesn't it? A woman of your background, marrying a duke? Surely you had much to gain by ensuring no rivals challenged your claim. I'm not a rival to a dead man's fiancée. I'm a witness to attempted murder. So you claim. Thornton's smile widened. But you were alone with the Duke in that library. No other witnesses to corroborate your story. How do we know you didn't orchestrate the entire scenario to frame my client? Because I'm not insane! The words burst out before she could stop them. Your client tried to kill us both. She stood in a ballroom full of London's elite and attacked Rowan with a knife. Are you suggesting I orchestrated that too? Objection, Hastings called, badgering the witness. Sustained! The judge fixed Thornton with a stern look. Move on, counselor. But the damage was done. Lillian could see the doubt on some jurors' faces, the calculation, the whispers. A woman with nothing, marrying a duke, suddenly at the center of a scandal. It looked suspicious. She knew that. Thornton pressed on. Tell me, Miss Hawke, how long had you known the Duke before your engagement was announced? A few weeks? A few weeks? And in that time you went from being a nobody to his fiancée. Quite a leap. It wasn't planned. No? You didn't seek him out? Didn't position yourself to catch his attention? I met him by accident, in a garden. How romantic and convenient. Thornton's voice dripped sarcasm. A desperate woman, drowning in debt and obscurity, happens to meet a wealthy duke. They fall madly in love in mere weeks. He proposes, despite barely knowing her. And then suddenly, everyone standing between them and happiness turns out to be a criminal. Forgive me, Miss Hawke, but it sounds rather too perfect. Lillian's hands clenched on the witness box railing. You want to know the truth? Fine. I didn't want to marry him. I tried to sabotage the engagement. I went to a ball planning to ruin myself so he wouldn't have me. That's how little I wanted this life. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Hastings looked alarmed, but Lillian was past caring. I was terrified, she continued, of being trapped, of losing myself, of becoming nothing more than a title and a pretty face at parties. So yes, I fought it. And then I discovered that Rowan was fighting the same fight, that we were both drowning in expectations we didn't want. We became allies before we became anything else. Partners. And when people tried to kill us, we survived together. She looked directly at Catherine. I didn't fabricate anything. I didn't have to. Your guilt was written in blood and theft and murder. All I did was refuse to let you get away with it. Silence. Absolute ringing silence. Thornton recovered first. A touching speech, but emotion isn't evidence. No, Lillian agreed. The ledgers are evidence. Eleanor Grant's testimony is evidence. The burr found on James Ashford's saddle, evidence. My feelings don't matter. The facts do. She stepped down from the witness box with her head high, ignoring the stares, the whispers, the entire weight of judgment pressing down on her. Rowan caught her eyes across the courtroom, and the look he gave her was pure, fierce pride. The trial continued. Rowan testified next, his voice hard and unwavering as he described the attack, the evidence. His brother's final letter. He spoke about James with a grief so raw it silenced even the most cynical observers. My brother was a good man, Rowan said. Better than me in many ways. He cared about the estate, about the people who depended on it. When he discovered the theft, he didn't hesitate. He chose justice over convenience, and they killed him for it. More witnesses followed. Servants who'd seen Radcliffe and Catherine together in suspicious circumstances. Financial investigators who'd traced the stolen money through increasingly elaborate shells. A physician who testified that James's injuries were consistent with a fall from a bolting horse, likely caused by deliberate sabotage. Each piece of evidence added weight to the prosecution's case, but the defense fought back hard, questioning every witness, challenging every conclusion, sowing doubt wherever possible. Then, on the fifth day, the prosecution played their final card, Catherine's brother. Lord Edward Marlowe took the stand looking like a broken man. He'd been arrested trying to flee to Italy and had agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Hastings approached him. "Lord Marlowe, tell the court about your involvement in the embezzlement scheme." Edward's voice was barely audible. "It started 20 years ago. Small amounts at first. My father's investments had failed and we were desperate. Lord Radcliffe suggested we could borrow from the Ashford accounts, just temporarily, to cover our debts." "And did you repay those loans?" "No. Radcliffe said it was safer to keep taking small amounts indefinitely, that the old Duke was too careless to notice." He swallowed. "By the time James Ashford took over management of the estate, we'd stolen nearly £2 million. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The jury members' faces showed shock, disgust, disbelief. When did James discover the theft? Last spring. He called a meeting with Radcliffe and myself, said he had proof that he was going to the authorities. Catherine was there. She begged him to reconsider, said it would destroy her family. James refused. What happened next? Edward's hands trembled violently. He looked at his sister in the dock and something crumpled in his expression. Catherine said James was weak, that he always had been, that he'd inherited the title but didn't have the spine to lead. She said... He stopped, voice breaking. She said someone needed to ensure the legacy went to someone stronger. Did she mean the current Duke? No, she meant herself. Through marriage to James, she could have controlled the estate, but James was going to expose us. So she... Edward's face crumpled. She said if James wouldn't cooperate, he needed to be removed, that an accident could be arranged, that once he was gone and Rowan inherited, she could marry him instead, control the legacy that way. And what was your response? I told her she was mad, that we should just return the money, face the consequences. But Radcliffe agreed with her, said it was the only way to protect ourselves. Tears streamed down Edward's face now. I should have stopped them, should have warned James. But I was a coward. I thought if I just stayed quiet, maybe they wouldn't actually do it. But they did. Yes, Radcliffe organized it, paid a stable hand to put the burr under James's saddle, made it look like an accident, and when James died, everyone believed it. Everyone except... He looked at Rowan. Except his brother, who came home asking questions, who wouldn't let it rest, and that's when they tried to kill him too. Catherine was obsessed. She couldn't accept that Rowan had chosen someone else, that her plan had failed. When Miss Hawke found the documents, Catherine saw it as a threat to everything, so she decided to eliminate both of them. Edward's voice dropped to a whisper. I tried to talk her out of it, begged her to stop, but she wouldn't listen. She said she'd come too far to lose now. Did she specifically say she intended to kill the Duke and Miss Hawke? Edward nodded miserably. She said dead witnesses couldn't testify, that once they were gone, we could destroy the evidence and blame everything on tragic circumstances. She was convinced it would work. The courtroom exploded. Journalists scrambled for doors, spectators shouted. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Catherine's face had gone deathly pale, then red. Then she lunged to her feet, screaming, You bastard! You coward! How dare you! Guards restrained her, but she kept shrieking accusations, denials, curses. Radcliffe sat motionless, his face finally cracking to show the fear beneath his mask. Thornton was frantically objecting, calling Edward's testimony a fabrication, a desperate attempt to save himself by throwing his sister to the wolves. But the damage was done. The jury's faces showed everything: horror, disgust, certainty. Vuoi. Hastings rested the prosecution's case. The defense called a few character witnesses, people who swore Catherine was kind, Radcliffe was trustworthy. This was all a terrible misunderstanding. But their testimony rang hollow against the mountain of evidence. Thornton gave a passionate closing argument about reasonable doubt, about the dangers of convicting based on circumstantial evidence, about how easy it was for desperate people to construct elaborate lies. But Hastings' closing was devastating. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard testimony from multiple witnesses. You have seen financial records bearing the defendant's signatures. You have heard Lord Edward Marlowe confess to the conspiracy and implicate his sister and Lord Radcliffe in murder. You have seen the knife Lady Catherine used to attack the Duke of Ashford in front of over 100 witnesses. This is not circumstantial. This is not conjecture. This is overwhelming, damning proof of guilt. He paused, letting his words sink in. James Ashford was murdered because he stood for justice, because he refused to let thieves and conspirators destroy his family's legacy. His brother nearly suffered the same fate. Miss Hawke risked her life to bring you the truth. Do not let their courage be in vain. Find these defendants guilty. Give James Ashford the justice he died seeking. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman's voice was steady and clear. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On the charge of attempted murder, guilty. On the charge of embezzlement, guilty. The courtroom erupted. Journalists rushed for the doors to file their stories. Lady Pemberton squeezed Lillian's hand so tight it hurt. Rowan stood motionless at the prosecution's table, his face carved from stone. Catherine was screaming again, accusations, denials, threats of revenge. Guards dragged her from the courtroom, still shrieking. Radcliffe went quietly, his expression finally showing the defeated terror he'd been hiding. They would both hang within the month. Justice. Finally, completely. But Lillian felt no triumph. Just exhaustion and grief for a man she'd never met, whose death had nearly destroyed them all. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. When Lillian and Rowan emerged, applause broke out. Not universal. There were still sneers, still whispers, but enough to matter. A woman called out, "You did right by him, miss, by the Duke and his brother both." Another voice, "Justice for James Ashford." An old man shouted, "God bless you, your grace, you and your lady both." Lillian felt tears prick her eyes. Not relief, not triumph, just exhaustion and a strange, fragile gratitude. Rowan's hand found hers. "Let's go home." They walked through the crowd together, ignoring questions from journalists, acknowledging nods from strangers, the entire spectacle of their lives made public. When they finally reached Rowan's townhouse, Lillian collapsed into a chair in his study and started to cry. Great, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep and raw. Rowan knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms. "It's over." "Is it?" she gasped between sobs. "The trial's over. But tomorrow there will be more papers, more gossip, more people deciding who I am and what I deserve. When does that end?" "Maybe never." He pulled back just enough to look at her. "But their opinions don't define you. You know who you are. I know who you are. That's enough." "Is it?" "It has to be." His voice was fierce. "Because I can't control what they think or say. But I can control what we build. Together. A life that's ours, not theirs." She looked at him. This man who'd been a stranger, then a partner, now something she couldn't quite name but knew she couldn't live without. "Marry me," he said suddenly. "Not because of duty or scandal or because it's expected. Marry me because you want to, because we choose each other." "We're already engaged." "That was arranged. This is real." He took her hands. "I'm asking if you'll have me. Flaws, baggage, the whole mess of who I actually am. Not the Duke. Me." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but this time they weren't born of grief. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her then, desperate and gentle and full of promises neither of them knew if they could keep, but they'd try. That was enough. They married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at Ashford House. Lady Pemberton attended, along with Eleanor Grant and her daughter, a handful of Rowan's few trusted friends, and no one else. The chief magistrate came as a guest, his presence both an honor and a reminder of everything they'd survived. No spectacle, no scandal sheets, just two people making promises in front of the witnesses who'd helped them survive. Lillian wore a simple cream gown that Lady Pemberton had commissioned, elegant without being ostentatious. Rowan looked at her like she was the only person in the world. When the priest pronounced them married, the applause was gentle, genuine, warm. Afterward, they walked through the Ashford House gardens, the same grounds where they'd first met, where everything had started. "Do you regret it?" Lillian asked. "Any of it? The murder and theft and near-death experiences?" "Yes." He smiled. "You? Never. Even when I crashed Lady Pemberton's ball covered in blood? Especially then, very dramatic. I was impressed." She laughed, real and bright and free. "What do we do now?" "Whatever we want." He stopped walking, turned to face her. "We rebuild the estate, root out anyone else who was stealing, honor James's memory properly, and we figure out how to live in a world that's going to scrutinize and judge and gossip about us for years." Sounds exhausting. "It will be." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "But I'm done running from things, and I'm done letting other people write my story." "Our story," she corrected. "Our story." They stood there in the garden as afternoon light turned golden, two people who'd started as strangers and become each other's greatest ally. Eleanor found them there an hour later. Your Graces, I mean." She smiled nervously. "I wanted to thank you for everything. My daughter is thriving in Scotland. She's learning to read, making friends with the estate manager's children. I've never seen her so happy." "You can stay there as long as you like," Rowan said. "The property is yours. Consider it payment for your courage." "I can't accept—" "You can." Lillian took the woman's hands. "You saved our lives. You gave James justice. This is the least we can do." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "He would have liked you, Mr. James. He valued courage above everything, honesty, standing up for what's right even when it's hard." She squeezed Lillian's hands. "You're what the Ashford legacy needed, both of you." The road ahead wouldn't be easy. London would never stop talking. The Ashford legacy would take years to repair. And there would always be those who saw Lillian as an opportunist, a nobody who'd climbed too high. But she'd learned something in the crucible of scandal and murder and survival. She wasn't nobody. She was the woman who'd faced down killers and conspirators, who'd stood beside a duke and demanded justice, who'd refused to break even when the entire world tried to crush her. She was Lillian Ashford, Duchess in her own right. And that was more than enough. 6 months later, Lillian stood in the Ashford House library, the same room where James's hidden documents had been found, where the conspiracy had begun to unravel. But it looked different now. Fresh paint, new shelves, books organized by subject rather than random accumulation. She'd spent weeks going through the estate records, cleaning up decades of mismanagement. It was tedious work, unglamorous, the kind of thing no one wrote ballads about, but it mattered. Rowan found her there as sunset painted the room gold. "Still at it?" "Almost finished. The last of the fraudulent accounts are closed. The legitimate investments have been reorganized. Starting next quarter, the estate should actually turn a profit for the first time in 20 years. You did that. We did that. You did most of it." He crossed to her, pride evident in every line of his face. "James would be proud. You accomplished what he started." Lillian closed the final ledger. "I wish I could have met him." "Me too." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "He would have liked you, would have appreciated how you fight." "I'm tired of fighting." "Then rest." He pulled her toward the window, where the garden stretched in peaceful green. "We've earned it." They stood together watching the sunset, and for the first time in months, Lillian felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Peace. Not perfect, not complete, but real. The scandal sheets had moved on to other dramas. Catherine and Radcliffe had been executed a month ago, public hangings that Lillian had refused to attend. Eleanor Grant and her daughter were safe and happy in Scotland. Lady Pemberton occasionally sent letters, tart, sharp, unexpectedly supportive. Life had found a rhythm. Do you ever think about the pond? Lillian asked suddenly. Rowan laughed. Where this all started. Occasionally. I was so angry that night. At my life, at being trapped, at everything I couldn't control. She leaned against him. If I hadn't walked to that pond, if I hadn't seen you, we would have met at the betrothal dinner instead. Hated each other on sight, probably. Probably, she smiled. But I'm glad it happened the way it did. Even the terrible parts. They made us this. This? A team, partners, whatever you want to call it. I call it love. He said it simply, without drama or flourish. Just fact. Lillian turned to face him fully. Good, because that's what I call it too. They kissed as the sun slipped below the horizon. Two people who'd survived everything the world had thrown at them and come out stronger. Outside, rain began to fall, soft and steady, washing the gardens clean. The kind of gentle rain that promised renewal, growth, new beginnings. Inside in the library that had once held secrets and betrayal, Lillian and Rowan stood together. Not because fate had demanded it, not because society expected it, but because they'd chosen each other again and again through every trial and terror. And in choosing, they'd found something neither had known they were searching for. Freedom, the kind that came not from escaping cages, but from building something worth staying for. Together, they'd rebuilt more than an estate. They'd rebuilt themselves, turned survival into strength, turned partnership into love, turned two broken people into something whole. The scandal would fade, the gossip would die. But what they'd created, this fierce, imperfect, fiercely honest bond, would endure. Because they'd fought for it, bled for it, refused to let anyone destroy it. As rain drummed against the windows and darkness fell over Ashford House, Lillian Ashford, Duchess, survivor, partner, stood with her husband and looked toward a future they would write together, on their own terms, in their own words, free.